with the intention, more than the intention, with the goal of getting to through human services entirely. So I think the same pace that we made this morning, we should be able to do that. Page 1 deals with Porterville Secured Treatment Program expansion. Mr. Martin, are you going to lead off for us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank
members. The governor increased the secure treatment program from the current 170 beds to 211 beds and eliminated the cap on transition beds and corrects the staffing formula error. The Senate rejected the May revision adjustment and reduced the governor's budget funding by $9 million general fund and 92.2 positions as a placeholder amount, and then directed staff to work with the administration on determining the appropriate number of secure treatment program and transition beds and other statutory changes that would be needed. The Assembly approved the May revision and adopted supplemental report language on the need for additional beds and the length of stay for residents in the transitional beds.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Bosler.
Sure. This is one part of a two-part proposal related to an issue that has gotten much more acute in the last few years related to the incompetent to stand trial population. These populations are often in local jails, and they're awaiting transfer, in this case, to a state developmental center, but also to our state hospital system. Specifically, right now, we have about 50 ISTs that are on ISTs that are also developmentally disabled that are waiting in jails for transfer to a developmental center. And so the importance of our proposal here was to provide additional space in the secure treatment facility at Porterville to move those individuals from the jails or the other facilities that they are at locally to the developmental center so they can start the incompetent to stand trial, to start the competency work. Some of the people specifically that have been on this waiting list have been for almost 200 days. So this is an area, this population specifically, where we have some acute challenges in moving people to the state facilities. We have been working with your staff and with the Assembly on some language, and we'll continue to work on that language about accountability related to the transition beds. We understand that we are asking for a removal of caps on the transition beds, and so we want to keep working with everybody on language that we can all agree to.
Sounds agreeable. We are going to hold this open. Any questions from the committee? All right, we will move on to page 2. This is the Porterville Developmental Center's fire alarm system upgrade. I understand there is a conference compromise.
Yeah, I think there's a conference compromise here. We had put forward a proposal in our January budget to update a much dilapidated alarm system at the Porterville Developmental Center, but then in the May revision, we came back with plans to close all of the developmental centers, including outside of the secure perimeter at Porterville. So instead of making significant new upgrades on buildings that will not be in use in coming years, we have tailored our proposal to just fund the upgrades in the secure treatment area and in other ancillary buildings that support that treatment center, as well as the transitional beds that we just discussed as well.
Sounds good. Assemblywoman Weber.
We moved the Senate version. We moved the Senate version of this, yes.
The compromise?
The compromise,
as described by Ms. Bosler.
As described, yes.
Very good. So that would be, we'll leave this open for Senator Nielsen on our side and 3-0 on the Assembly side for the compromise. And again, we'll leave the final vote open until Senator Nielsen arrives.
Okay.
Remaining in DDS, we'll move on to page 3, the delayed egress secured perimeters facilities.
Yes, so we had a proposal. These are some new facilities as we do transition more and more of the population that's currently in the developmental centers into the community. We need to build up more and different types of community resources. One of those is a facility that we've been talking about for several years now that's we call delayed egress or secured perimeter facilities. And these are for individuals with developmentally disabled individuals that have some significant behavior issues that may require a delayed egress or a secure perimeter to keep them safe. These facilities, we've been in a lot of conversations with the federal government about the approval of these facilities, about being able to draw down federal funds for these facilities. And right now, statute basically says that we cannot move forward on these facilities until we get approval from the federal government. Right now, we're proposing trailer bill language to eliminate those requirements so we can move forward on licensing these facilities. They are a new thing. There's a lot of statute that describes them. We do think they fit a need and are a good substitute to the larger developmental centers as we move forward. The Senate has modified the language, and we understand that there's conversations, and my colleague can probably fill in more ongoing, and we continue to work on language that we can work with.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, did you want to add anything with regard to the modified proposal of the Senate?
Just that the conversations are ongoing.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we will leave that open. And Senator Nielsen, on page, okay, that would be on page 1. Sorry, page 2. We left 1 open. Page 2, the final vote will be 3-0-3-0 on the compromise. Page 3 will be left open, taking us to page 4, self-determination program, provisional budget bill language, and placeholder trailer bill language. Governor has a proposal, and we modified it.
Yeah, so we're currently in the midst of implementing a bill that was signed 2 years ago that creates a new self-determination program for up to 2,500. It's a pilot program for up to 2,500 individuals. This would give the individuals and their families more flexibility and more direct oversight and management of how they manage their service package by giving them a flat amount of money to purchase the services that they need for their child or family member. We are currently in discussions with the federal government about this program, and we have submitted a waiver that has not been approved. My understanding is, and we have some technical provisional language that will just allow us to manage this program when it does get approved and it does get implemented. My understanding is that the Senate's action is really is to aid in the transition of additional individuals from the developmental centers to the community, and we're continuing to work with everybody about how this may be complementary to what we're trying to do in the May revision. I will say we have there's a lot of uncertainty about how the main pilot program is going to be implemented. It's agreed upon based on a cost-neutral premise, and so that's something we're going to have to work through when we work on this language, but we are continuing to work on the language.
Sounds good. The self-determination for consumers seems completely reasonable and supportable. Will this have any impact on the way regional centers operate their procurement? Is there any risk for regional centers at all?
Teresa Calvert with Department of Finance. I'm not sure the procurement of services through providers already. I mean, it will have, consumers through their individual program plans will have a set budget that will be the same as what their budget is now under the pilot program under self-determination. And so they would use that with the assistance of a financial manager service to purchase services, but I don't know operationally for the regional centers how that would affect their procurement processes.
We haven't heard from...
I'm not aware, but I can check and follow up and see if there's been any questions about that.
That's the only thing that comes to my mind in making this shift.
Right.
So that's open for now. Page 5, institutions for mental disease clarification. Senate had a proposal. Mr. Martin.
The Senate adopted placeholder trailer bill language to clarify the responsibility of a regional center when a consumer is placed in an institute of mental disease, regardless of who makes the placement.
I think we understand this language is also to help with our May revision proposal to really start the process to close all of the developmental centers outside of the secure perimeter at Porterville. And we just want to continue to work through the issues on this trailer bill language.
Yeah, we do too.
Give us, just flesh out a little bit the differences for someone who's within an IMD as opposed to a developmental center.
We're going to have to get back to you on that.
Mr. Martin?
So, actually, I've never visited an IMD. I have read some materials about them.
I have a note that they're probably more restrictive policies.
The IMDs are a very restrictive environment. And the concern, I believe, is that when regional center clients are placed in that very restrictive environment, it may be more restrictive in some senses than is really necessary for some people with behaviors, and that we want to carefully monitor when they're placed there to make sure that people who could potentially be placed in less restrictive environments aren't placed in IMDs.
Okay, so again, to be left open. Page 6, Fair Labor Standards Act, and overtime regulation. Governor has a proposal, Ms. Bosler?
Yes, last year, the legislature and the administration implemented the Fair Labor Standards Act rules that went into place to require the provision of overtime to workers in home supportive services, including some services that are developed through through our regional center system. So in January, a court vacated the rule that had been promulgated by the U.S. Department of Labor. And so at that time, this was just past budget development, and so the money was left in the budget because it was too late to change it at that point. But we continue to, the court case is ongoing. We think that there will be an action later this summer. We have continued to build in a July 1 start date for the payment of those additional hours at a different rate. And this has an impact in the developmental, the DDS budget as well. And so that is $43 million. I believe the Senate approved some trailer bill language to provide some accountability about how this rule change at the federal level that we were implementing until the court vacated the rule is going to impact the delivery of services in the regional centers.
And your take on the trailer bill language at this point is?
I would put it in the same category as the other ones that we're still reviewing and understanding the intent and all of the details.
Okay. To be left open, yes, Senator Nielsen.
Yes, it's being left open, and just a caution, the court decision probably won't come down before our budget's done, do you think? Or do you anticipate action? You can't really tell.
Don't have all of the information on that, but I believe it is past July 1.
That's of some concern if we take this budget action at this point and we create an obligation, maybe even a legal obligation. I'm a little concerned about that, presaging that court decision.
So the current statute actually reads that it will not be implemented, it's not going to be implemented until the federal law stands, and the court actually vacated the rule that was promulgated by the U.S. Department of Labor, and so that rule does not exist right now, and so that has been appealed, and they're working through all of the arguments, and so we don't have all of the information about how it will look, but current statute does not require implementation until there is actually a rule being implemented at the federal level.
We like Senator Nielsen comforted, so thank you. Page 7, addressing disparities in service delivery. So again, the action was taken by the Senate. Mr. Martin.
The Senate adopted placeholder trailer bed language to clarify when regional centers must provide written information to consumers or their families in their native language, require the Health and Human Services Agency to convene a work group to make recommendations relative to reducing disparities, and require regional center performance contracts to include guidelines and measurements to reduce disparities.
Thank you. Ms. Bosler.
Yes, I just will say that this is an issue that, as a state, we've been working on for several years, and there's been several pieces of legislation to address this issue over the last several years, and we continue to work with your staff on your language and iron out all the details.
So we currently provide information in how many languages? We have certain threshold languages?
I don't know how many languages it is. I think we were looking at existing statute in the recent package of legislation, and I think there is a native language requirement in some of the existing statute, but I don't think that threshold languages is used as commonly on the developmental services side.
Yeah, so there is a statute that requires consumers' native language be used during the IPP, or the Individualized Family Service Plan process. So that does exist.
Okay.
And an important detail of our trailer bill language is that we have to provide written information in these languages.
And that's something that's been discussed during the language discussion so far, is the difference between the individual program plan discussion and then the written materials that would go along with these services. So that is a point of discussion as well.
Right. All right. So conversation's ongoing. We'll leave this open. Senator Laura, sorry.
Yeah, at this point, I just want to know this is an important issue for Senator Mitchell and for myself. And understanding the language is important as well, and the written information would be critical. But I think we also have to look at the diverse staffing issue. Being able to have somebody that looks like the person we're trying to serve is important, because if we just got this sheet here and we see that at every regional center, Asians and Hispanics or Latinos continue to be the ones that receive the less funding. And so we need to do a much better job in getting a diverse workforce that looks like the state, so that we can, again, help folks that need these services, not just in written, but also that look like themselves. I think that's also important. But I think Senator Mitchell's onto something here, and I think we need to do a much better job.
Points well taken, Senator Laura. Thank you. Page 8, rate increase proposal at the Department of Developmental Services and Department of Rehabilitation. So the governor had no proposal.
Yes, we continue to work in a stakeholder group discussing a myriad of issues at the regional center level, including rates and access to services. We did not have a proposal to increase rates in our budget. The Senate and the Assembly have different approaches. The Assembly is more of a across-the-board approach. The Senate has some targeted rate increases for certain providers of services in the community. Our underlying concern about this and many of the others proposals that commit to significant ongoing funds. The Assembly's proposal at full implementation would cost over $400 million general fund. Just continue to have concerns about the ability of the state's finances to support an augmentation of this level.
Yes, Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we've had a lot of discussion outside of this conference hearing about this particular community. And as I'm sure everyone is aware in this committee, this particular group has been very vocal. But it is certainly a community that deserves our attention. I think their funding levels have been abysmally low considering who they serve. And I would ask that the members of the committee reconsider perhaps giving them the 10%. That would just keep them afloat right now, not even providing all of the services that they really, truly need for this community. So that would be my request to the committee, that we give that careful consideration.
I love it when Republicans want to spend. It's okay with me. Assemblyman Bloom.
Thank you. To some extent, I want to echo Assemblymember Melendez's comments. And over the last few days, I'm sure all of us have received the volume of phone calls that I've received in my office, and the tweets by the hundreds. This is a group of individuals in the state that are organized around a very righteous issue from my perspective. And I think the two houses have different approaches, but we're really aiming at the same goal, and that's to try and repair something that's been broken for some time. And if our pattern holds true here, we're going to hold this item open while we continue to discuss this. But since there are many people who are listening in, and for whom this is a fairly Byzantine process that they've never experienced before. I just want folks to know that we're going to continue having this discussion. By not taking an action today, it doesn't mean that this, by any stretch of the imagination, that this is off the table. And I wanted to also just thank all the advocates and coalitions that are helping to raise awareness around this very important issue.
Thank you for the clarification, Assemblyman. And I think one thing, first of all, let me say, I know for a fact, and we've heard it expressed here today, that this issue of underfunding our infrastructure of our community services for those individuals and families who deal with developmental disabilities is not a partisan issue. It impacts each of our districts. It touches each of our hearts. And we know it's our responsibility to help both individuals and families with the fact of these circumstances. What we included in our Senate trailer bill language, and what I think should continue to be a part of how we collectively consider transitioning, as the federal government is insisting upon, and as we all believe at this point, provides better services shifting from developmental centers to the community, that we make sure that the money we're going to save, and I would be happy to hear from Finance your thoughts on this, because it will be phased and it will take many years, because we want to make sure every individual is cared for appropriately as we make the transition from developmental center to the community. But the state will experience some significant savings. And I don't think, and this is probably getting back to Assemblywoman Melendez's support earlier, that those savings shouldn't be dissolved into our general fund. They're for a purpose, and they're for the purpose of this community. And I know that there are fixed costs and that we can't subtract one individual and expect so many dollars of savings from the developmental centers, but there will be significant savings, and we really should be very careful, and that's what the trailer bill language touches on, that those savings, along with these individuals, make their way to the community and spent in an appropriate fashion.
Yeah, so the May revision really does mark a big transition. So we're actually, for the first time, moving towards a system with very few people in a state developmental center. So this is going to pose a big transition for the state and its role in oversight over the regional center system, where all of, the vast majority of individuals with developmental disabilities are already being served. It's really a very small population left at the developmental centers. But running an institution creates there's a lot of focus and time and attention and care to managing an institution. So when we're only going to be managing one at the end of the transition, there will be a need, I think, to really relook at the focus of the state and its oversight and support to the community in a different way. I think that's part of what the task force is really working through. They've talked a lot about rate and rate structure, and I think that's something we will want to continue to work on, but also governance and other issues that are changing rapidly. As you mentioned, the federal government has also recently promulgated regulations really changing the way even the community facilities are run. Requiring those beds, those facilities that have 6 beds to transition to a place where they only have 4 beds. So there's a lot of activity in this area. There's a lot of change. The state does have very strong statutory entitlement and requirements that they must implement and uphold. And so there's going to be a lot of work in this area as we transition, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. In terms of the language that specifically earmarks the savings from the developmental centers, that's something that I think we struggle with a little bit because it's just a really very cumbersome way of budgeting. And I think there is absolutely every intention of making sure that there is enough money going to the community to support the services that are needed for those individuals transitioning from the state level to the community. And that's why we did put forward an amount in the May revision to really to help to build that capacity, because we know that capacity and those facilities need to be out there. And some of them are going to have to be brought up from the ground. They're not there right now. And so we do understand and recognize that we do need to invest in the new facilities, bringing up different types of facilities, and really making sure that the system at the local level is stable. And so that's something that we will be continuing to look at and work with the community on in the coming months in these task forces that the director has been running.
So I appreciate the comments, and I know the devil is in the details of the words of the trailer bill language, and we will work that out. I wouldn't so much consider what we're talking about as an earmark, but having a greater grasp of the fact that as we are in this transition, we have simultaneously starved our local community infrastructure. And it, in many places, I'm sure my colleagues are giving me nod signs. They hear from their local regional centers as well, that there are service providers that are shutting down as we speak, and that we can't allow ourselves to repeat mistakes of the past where we closed down a state system only to realize that we starved our community system. We've got to, so again, not earmarking, but really, in a clear-eyed fashion, recognize the real needs and the real costs of keeping a healthy community system running, and then put the money there. And one place to look is where we used to spend at the developmental center. Senator Lara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also just want to say that, there's no doubt in my mind that we have clearly devastated the funding for these regional centers and that have really impacted the lives of, thousands, if not millions of children and their families. But, in the Senate proposal, understanding you did mention about the regulations that are coming from the feds, and that is why I think, the Senate version, we try to look at the programs that have to do much more with individual choice. Knowing that the feds are kind of moving towards this new model, we felt that it was important to do to look at the services like the supported living, supported employment, respite services, and of course the in-screen and transportation services that get you to to these different opportunities. So I think these programs are the best to adopt to the federal regulations and will give us kind of a better leeway in terms of as we continue to talk about this. But I think I want to commend our colleagues here, on both sides of the aisles, understanding that we've really done a disservice to these families and these communities, and the buck stops here. We are the ones that have to do everything we can to support these families, and so I look forward to continuing a robust discussion as we move this issue forward.
Yeah, I on behalf of those of us in the Assembly, obviously you know, whether Democrat or Republican, we recognize the tremendous value of going back and restoring funding in our centers and building our centers. That's extremely important. We have done the across-the-board 10% cut because we think that covers many programs that sometimes, even the ones identified in our Senate recommendation that are left out, the day program, the day service programs, host of other things that they have identified amongst themselves as where the greatest need is, depending upon the community and the services of the people that they serve. So the good thing with both of these proposals is that they are significant proposals. It's a matter of us combing through and coming to a clear understanding about what we're going to fund. I think we're fairly clear that the resources that were once found in those centers should also follow the individuals who are coming out of those centers because the needs are still there. And they may even be greater, but the outcome also will be greater for those individuals who are coming out of the centers. So this has been a long process, longer than my time here. And it was one of the first things I heard about when I got here was the cuts and the 10% and even what impact our minimum wage is going to have on these centers and their ability to keep staff. So I visited several of the centers around the state, and you know, they have some serious issues about keeping good staff that's adequately paid because many of their staff are making almost minimum wage, and yet they're people with bachelor's degrees and just a host of things. So, you know, we're finally looking at it, I think, in a holistic sense and funding, so we're very committed to it. The good thing, of course, is that, you know, both of us have done some significant work here, and so it's just a matter of us combing through it. So when we hold it open, it's not because we hold it open because we're wavering. It's because we're holding it open because we want to do the best we can do. And that's what I want folks to understand. This is a commitment that we have to the disabled community that's very clear. And so I really appreciate that. And that's one thing I think on both sides of the aisle that everyone has said the same thing on both of the houses, that this is our year to do something significant for our disabled communities.
Senator Nielsen.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just so we round the table here, I experienced this one time around. Deinstitutionalization began under Governor Reagan, continued through Governor Brown 1, and as a new senator, I ended up representing Napa and Sonoma State Hospitals, DD and MH, and I got to see firsthand the impacts of that, where deinstitutionalization made a lot of sense, just like putting inmates in the community or parolees in the community, but if the resources aren't there, both of those elements fail. And it has been a huge problem before. Our problem here is even greater now for these populations. And the sensitivity of the families particularly is something we've got to be aware of. So, and the providers, I totally agree with that, although I probably can't go along with the minimum wage, Senator Weber, but other things we are clearly in agreement, and it is well that we let that be known early in the process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. So as we continue, let's all remember that our community partners are literally doing the Lord's work, and we have to be there for them.